we have like an even more special event, I'm just going to say, because it features one of our really Woodstock's best bookseller, Gretchen Primack. And she is a poet, she is an educator, and as I mentioned, an indie bookseller, and she lives right here in the Hudson Valley, and she has taught and administrated prison education programs since 2006. She's the author of 3 poetry collections, Kind, Visiting Days, and Dora's Red Spaces. And she co-wrote The Lucky Ones, My Passionate Fight for Animals, My Passionate Fight for Farm Animals, with the Woodstock Farm Animal Sanctuary co-founder Jenny Brown. And today we're actually celebrating a new edition and a really expanded edition of her wonderful collection, Kind. Gretchen is going to be in conversation with Nickole Brown, and Nickole received her MFA from the Vermont College, studied literature at Oxford University, and was the editorial assistant for the late Hunter S. Thompson. And she's the co-author of several books: Sister, a novel in poems; Fanny Says, a biography in poems; and To Those Who Were Our First Gods. She has taught at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, and she's now the editor of the Marie Alexandra Poetry Series and teaches at the Sewanee School of Letters and the Great Smokies Writing Program at UNCA and the Hinneman Settlement School, among other places. And she lives with her wife, poet Jessica Jacobs, in Asheville, North Carolina, where she volunteers at 3 animal sanctuaries. And I actually want to come back to Gretchen because I have to mention that Gretchen is a passionate advocate for the rights and the welfare of non-human animals, and she lives with several of them, along with a beloved human named Gus. And also Gretchen's poetry has been included in the Paris Review, Prairie Schooner, Plowshares Field, Poet Lore, the Massachusetts Review, the Antioch Review, New Orleans Review, Rhino Tampa Review, and many other journals and anthologies. And I'm just so pleased to introduce Gretchen Primack to you today.
Oh, that's me. There I am. I'm going to have a little bit of like sunshine issues, so I hope that doesn't bother folks too much. Yeah, I'm Gretchen Primack, and can we make it so that Nickole and I are, you know, together? Yes. Hi, Nickole.
Hi, how are you? It's so nice to scroll through and see all of these faces and all of the puppy dogs. Nan, I'm loving the puppy you've got there right in the camera. And Gretchen, I am so thrilled to be here today. And I don't know if you guys have seen this yet, but holy Moses, it's absolutely gorgeous. Hardcover, it's got all of this full color art in it. It's fantastic. Would you like to start us off by reading a poem?
I can totally do that. I thought I'd focus on new poems tonight. And so yeah, let's get into a poetry mood. I'll start with one about a heron. It's called Heron, super creative. And it's got a little quote from the poet Jerry Stern. And the quote is, "I love the hand as well as the mind." I love the hand as well as the mind. So I think I had just read that, and then I saw a heron. And so this is what happened. I was talking to the heron. "Well, blue chicken, where is your bed? You must be thinking with that neck. I think with the meat and bones that make my hands. The light's lying thick as wheat paste on the water, warm as a nest of sweat bees. Nothing about you says lonely, and I'd like to kiss the side of your head. Sure as the skin's stretched over me, I'm halfway done. Certain things won't happen again, certain lasts and firsts. Here on the bank grow the first white muscle of an egret, a trillium's first red tooth. It is all right that I know so little and will leave the world and all its hands and twigs, overlapping beaks, hearts and buds. It's hard to keep thinking about belonging and damage. Let me go, blue bird, brown water.
That's so gorgeous. And I love how right off with this poem, I can feel that familiar ache that is in a lot of your poems. Like a look to what is here, but not for very long, you know, and just the sweetness of, you know, well, blue chicken, where is your bed, you know, and that playfulness, and I wish I could just kiss you right now, but then also the seriousness at the same time. And I should say too, the first edition of this book, I bet most of you might have a copy of it already. It came out in 2012, and it was a groundbreaking text in so many ways, speaking out for animals in a way that I know I had never really seen in literature before. And I'll read for everybody here just a couple of quotes that came with that book. Kazim Ali, who is a well-known vegan poet, called it an essential reading for the truth they tell about our relationship to and treatment of creatures. C.J. Sage said, the collection brings to light the station of non-human animals in society and provides insight into the worldview of animal advocates. And on and on. And Sharon Gannon says this, which I love. She sort of quotes you back to you and says, you know, that animals cannot forget hell even for a day, because you, Gretchen, cannot either. And all of those are so interesting. And now you have this new edition in hardcover, published by Lantern Press, with a foreword by Tim Siebels. You got 10 new poems, these gorgeous flip plates. But let me ask you, like, you know, a lot has happened in the world since 2012. How has your relationship to these poems grown or changed since then?
You know, they've stayed very active in my life, because I read a lot from the book when I do readings, and I've continued to do a lot of readings specifically around this book. And even I came out with another book, Visiting Days, a couple of years ago, and even when I would read from that, I'd often read one or two books from Kind. So it's felt like this friend that's been with me the whole time. But I've always been aware that there are subjects that I didn't touch on in it that I wanted to, and the world has changed. COVID happened, and I wanted to speak to that. So at the same time that it felt like this old friend that I still loved and felt very close to, it also felt like there was more to say. And so having this opportunity to have the reissue was really welcome. Can you hear Neville snoring in the background?
No, I can't, but that might just because my own dog is snoring as well.
Right, yeah.
It's
a very appropriate, you know, backdrop to our conversation. Snoring dog. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times my dog will sort of stretch out right in the middle of a reading on Zoom and just kind of,
yeah.
He's just done. Well, what were some of the topics you felt that you missed? You said that there were things that you wanted to say that you didn't get to.
Yeah, you know, one of the things is that I had poems about all these different animals, and also poems about being a human who cares about this issue, right? I mean, that's a big part of the book too. And I never talked about fish. I think I mentioned fish in one poem, a poem called Mercy, but I didn't have a poem for the fish. And I think we're so, look, the whole book is about this idea that we have this society that's very much hierarchical, and the danger that comes from that. And, you know, we can see the danger that comes of us saying, you know, I'm a cop, I have power, you don't. I'm white, I have power, you don't. I'm straight, I have power, you don't. Right? I'm male, I have power. I'm cisgender. All of these issues are issues around power differential. And I'm very interested in them. And I'm also very interested in the dynamic, I'm human, you're not. You don't matter. You're not important. I can do what I want, right? That hierarchical thinking, instead of a thinking about, we're all in this. It's not hierarchical. It's not I'm better. And it's not my dog is better than a fish. It's just, we're all here. We're doing our thing, right? And the thing about fish that I find so interesting is that, or ironic, is that, you know, it's because fish look so different than us that it's harder for us to think of them as,
Yes,
you know, sentient, right? But that's our limitation. It's us not being able to see past appearance. That's a human limitation. So here we are saying, I'm so much better than you because your body is made for water, so you look really different than me. And yet that thinking shows that we're not better, you know? So I find that really interesting. So I was really wanting to write about fish, and I got an opportunity to write a poem about a fish.
will you read that poem? Can I ask you that?
Of course, I can read the poem about the fish. And it has, Nickole, you mentioned that there are images. And so here's one, and this is a painting called Happy Tilapia. So you can think about that while you're hearing this. So this is called Because You Are Silver. Because you are silver, because of your round eye and where it sits, because of your water home and your air distrust, because fins are frilled paper, not hands, because of your temperature, I can take your body, hook you up in a flail, net you up with 1,000 others, and no person will sigh for your life. The body made for its home, just as any body is. Its flashing silver, its cool fins and perfect eyes. Because our vaunted minds are too small to understand other minds, we will call you mindless and swallow you. Let me look that face in the eye and tell you, fish, I could no sooner eat your flesh than my own.
I love that so much. You know, I learned not that long ago that fish have their own morning chorus, just like birds do, and they will sing when the light hits the water, and there's a recording of it online, and
Wow.
all of these things that we're learning, and you know, hearing you read about a fish in that way makes me think of one of my favorite moments in an essay that you wrote. Basically you say, what do we do? You talk about how people worry about anthropomorphization. You know, they worry about, that point of view. And you say, well, what do we do now? What's the opposite of anthropomorphizing? We ignore and or belittle and or negate if it suits our needs and our planet is suffering for it. But what if we stopped worrying what we were deigning to give a species too much credit? What if we erred on the side of respecting another species too much? And I love that because you take these animals in your poems and you elevate them up with this white space around them and make them into something beautiful to behold. And it changes our perception of them. Do you feel like if you were, say, to compare when the first edition of your book came out in 2012 and now, do you feel like the readership is different? Do you feel like people have changed in terms of what it is that you're trying to get across about animals, about non-human animals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of the time I do think it's changing. I think people are more and more aware. We're more and more aware of the effect of what we're doing. So environmentally, we can't, I mean, this is Earth Day. We need to pay attention to what the choices that we make around other species, what that's doing to our planet.
Yeah.
So we know that the animal agriculture sector is a major driver of climate change, not like top 10, top 2, of driver of climate change. Inconvenient truth, but truth. We know that rainforest devastation comes primarily from raising the rainforest so that we can plant crops for animals to eat or graze animals, right? So it's all tied together. If we care about wild animals, we should care about the fact that the reason that they don't have enough land is because we're taking that land for animal agriculture. So even if you only care about wild animals, this is an issue. So I think that stuff is becoming more and more known. And the other thing at the same time that we're learning is about animal cognition. So we're learning about fish and their cognition. We're learning about chicken cognition. We're learning about all of these things where we're saying, okay, you know what? I gotta stop saying, that that he's as dumb as a bird brain or something, and thinking that that's a negative, right? This kind of thing. So as we learn more about our effects and also about the ways in which we are the same, that we keep not wanting to believe or just not believing, I think things are changing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned Earth Day before. Don't you have a poem called Climate Change?
I do, and it's I'll read that one. It's a bit despairing. It can really make you feel impotent, can it? Something this large. So I think that's the mood that I was in, and wondering if anything that any of us do can make a difference. But I think we can. So I'll preface it by saying that. Climate change. A compass is always right. And I thought adults were like that. They would figure it out. They would tremor in a shift and then true us. I grew into this world and its blood factories. Now I know only a compass is a compass. I don't like things hanging over me, so I'm anxious to get dying over with. But I want all this other trauma, this solvable hell, to get solved. And now. But there are no adults in that room. They are busy on the kill line. And which of these lines would slow that line for even a moment?
Mm. Wow. It's powerful, though. And it is infused with despair, but not necessarily hopelessness, because the hell is solvable.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and there's the key right there, and that you are speaking up for it, and it is solvable. That's your way. That's your way in. And I think too of things that have changed since the original edition came out. Of course, here's the thing: all of us are still wrestling with, and that's 2020.
Yeah.
Not to mention 2016, which was another, but 2020 in the pandemic. And you wrote about that in some of these new poems, right?
Yeah, I've got 2 poems about COVID. Yeah.
Would you share one of them?
Sure. Let me do COVID 1. Yeah. Do you remember, Nickole, the first moment that you had that feeling like, wow, there's this effect of the pandemic, which is that everybody else on the planet is like relaxing a little bit because we're not on the scene right now. Like we're not out there. So like animals were kind of taking a minute and the air was getting a little cleaner and, you know, they were relaxed. They weren't getting run over and they were, you know, and so
I saw black bears in my yard every day last summer because they would go downtown Asheville at night and then meander. And I live really close to downtown, and then they would meander down our drive going back to the woods in the morning. So much so that our dogs would run and get toys for them and run to the window like, the big black dog is back.
I want to play.
Yeah, but you're right, like everything changed. Like they could finally breathe a little.
Yeah. Yeah, so keep that thought in mind. COVID-1. This year, spring and summer decided to go on without us, to roll in the fields while we rolled in poison, the glory, the relaxed breaths of it. Spring and summer pressed against each other, not a reed fit between. They made us wait while the birds built and snakes sunned and crocs snapped at their frogs. The air milded and cleared far from our sick beds because of our sick beds. Oh, human, see, you are important. Biology, hubris, apocalypse, cages, carbon, energy. You are important, just not the way you think, just not the way you wish.
It's not the way you think, just not the way you wish. I love how your poems just crystallize everything down. You know, I have a tendency to write long, and your poems have this tight, really minimal quality to them, but it seems like every single word just packs a punch, you know. Could you talk about your process of writing so that I could just steal everything that you're doing?
Oh my God.
So
First
amazing.
of all, your poems live in the houses that they're supposed to live in. They live in the lines they're supposed to live in.
I
Believe
so
me.
admire what you do, though.
If anybody
Approaches like the force of like a super powerful haiku. They're just so lean and muscular.
they it's like the way that I walk through the world is that way. I take deep pleasure in sloughing off chaff, you know. I want things to get as polished, that polished little perfect grain that's under the chaff, that has everything that a plant needs to live, you know. That's where I want to get to. So it brings me like an intense, like a physical pleasure to just like winnow it down to what it needs to be, you know.
And what does that look like on the page? Is that like long drafts and then you cut away, or do you let something sort of reside in your mind and then finally write carefully word by word by word?
I think earlier it would have been more the former. And at this point, it's like I can do a lot of that stuff almost subconsciously. Like by the time it gets to the page from my brain, it's already been tightened down. It might get a little tighter, but it's, and I take pleasure in editing even prose, like just even making that smaller. But you know, the concept of, and I talk to this with my poetry students, of kind of the on-ramp and the off-ramp, where we're kind of like, we're making text and then the poem doesn't really start until that third stanza. You could just get rid of that. You know, it's like a rocket booster. You get rid of the booster, right? And you just let the rocket go.
Everything can just sort of fall away.
Yeah. And so I think I have that in my head so much that I don't even write those first three stanzas anymore. It just starts with that fourth stanza idea, you know?
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I think it's also testament to how long and hard you've been thinking about these things as well. you know, and some of the poems that are the most heartbreaking and rendered to me are the ones that focus on cows, particularly those that that humans use as dairy cows. And this seems to come up a lot in your work. And I was going to ask you if there's a reason why you think that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the situation with the way that we utilize female bodies of animals is super distressing to me, because it's very distressing to me in humans. I don't like the idea of a female body being commodified, you know? And I think that for a lot of people, the idea of not eating an animal's body, or not, you know, not wearing fur, you know, there's a lot of things that are almost no-brainers for a lot of people. It's like, I get it, you know. But I was somebody who, for 23 years, was considered myself an animal lover, and changed the way that I ate and thought, you know, as a result of being an animal lover and wanting to, you know, have my philosophies and my behavior align, you know. And then people started to tell me the deal with dairy, you know, and the fact that, you know, a mother and child need to be separated if we want to take that child's dinner for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So that concept blew my mind, and I really did want to sort of keep writing about it. And I think there were already 3 poems in kind that dealt with this idea that it's so that we can have yogurt or cheese or ice cream, you know, we have to, you know, tear a mother from her child. And what we do to that child, you know, I'm not going to get as heavy as I could here, but that is one of the very disturbing elements about it. And it's as simple as that. There's no way around it. That is what has to happen. So I actually ended up adding another, sorry.
Oh, would you consider your poems to be feminist acts then?
Yes, yes. I don't think that I could call myself a feminist and allow animal agriculture to do what it is, because it is only, it is about the commodification and of the female body, and the intense, like, just the manipulation of the female reproductive system. That's what it is. And that really creeps me out.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It is so related. Like at first, people don't think of it in those terms, but it absolutely is. Can I hear you? Can I ask you to read one of those poems?
Yeah. In the name of just reading new ones, I'm going to read a new one also, because then I can show off one of the other images from the book. This is one of Jane O'Hara's incredible paintings. I'm sorry that my camera is being fuzzy tonight. I don't know what's up with that. But
beautiful.
This is called Blue Ribbon. I just want to mention, like, I really love aesthetics, and I love pleasure, and I love beauty, and I love art. And I think that, you know, it's like the old labor cry, give us bread, but give us roses, right? We need that. And I'm very unhesitant about how much I need that. And the art in here is something that hits me very aesthetically, on a very aesthetic level, and on a meaning level. And so behind me is also one of the images in the book by Dana Ellen, who also did the cover. But you can see that, like, she has a lush, just amazing aesthetic, and she's extremely tuned in to animal issues and the dynamics that we're talking about. And they're doing the same thing in art that I'm doing in words, in visual art that I'm doing in words. And that marriage of aesthetics and meaning is so powerful to me. So it's amazing to have their work.
Well, and I noticed in her paintings in particular, she does something that you do, where the animal is presented in all of its lovable sweetness. And yet, if you look closer, you're like, oh, wait. I mean, the cover is really indicative of that, you know, because you have, you know, these two cutesies, right, with masks on, and then you're like, wait a minute, you know, they are wearing each other's faces.
Mm-hmm.
In what that means, you know, so you see it at first and you're like, oh, and then you look at it again and you're like, oh wait, there's a force coming up from underneath. And I think your poems do something like that.
Mm.
You know, it gets you close to the animal and makes the reader puts the animal in the loving gaze as you do.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
but yet has something to say in
Right.
of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a huge compliment to be compared to Dana Ellen in any way.
Well, the artwork is significant throughout, you know, and maybe we can talk more about what that does, but I want to hear that, Carol.
Okay, so this one is called Holstein, and I'm a big fan of the persona poem. It's a poem in the voice of someone else, and Visiting Days is a book just of those, of persona poems. And here's one in the voice of a mother, a Holstein, which is a kind of, yeah, we're big into breeding. Our species loves to breed. So Holstein. I was also a child, and also had one, and another a year after, and another, and could not touch even one. Had I been born into a kind world, my life would have been mine, not a stranger's, as long as my body wanted life. Had I lived in a kind world, child, this milk would have been yours. No one would have filled your lungs with loss. Put your head where your kind is born to be, but is never allowed. At my flank, the great spill of me. Smell me from your bent neck, child.
Yeah. Like, okay, I'm done now. It's so good. And I love what the poem does too, in teasing out, as your book does many times, the word kind.
Mm.
You know, if this were a kind world, you know, if this were a world of compassion, but then also teasing out the kinship. You know, you are one of my kind.
Mm-hmm.
In that duality that exists in the title of your book.
Mm-hmm.
That it's just it's so compelling. And I think we forget how kindness and kin are one and the same and have the same roots.
Right, right. Yeah, you brought that up in your amazing blurb for this new.
Well, but I almost felt daft when I came to it, because I was just like, oh, it's like one of those things I should have known that you taught me. I should have known that. And it was just right there in front of my nose. But you know, you become so familiar with language and you use it without thinking about it. So I'm curious, like, you know, you write about so many different non-human animals, and another animal that you write about very effectively is the dog. Rightly so, right? You have one snoring near you. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is in your work, you sort of tease out the vastly different ways in which we treat man's best friend, right? And I was wondering, you have two poems in particular. You have a poem called Chain, and a poem called Eleanor. And I'm wondering if we have time. I know we're getting close to the time when everybody's going to ask their questions, but I was wondering if you could read those two and maybe talk about them a little bit.
Right. Yeah, you totally got it. It's like there's kind of animals that we put in different categories, different kinds, right? So that's what Dana's doing here. She's saying, well, these are pretty much the same, right? You know, I mean, they're making each other the same, and yet this is the one that we're going to pet, and this is the one
This is the one we eat.
Right? So, but then it's more complicated than that because some people pet dogs and some people don't, you know? So then, yeah, I think that's great. I would love to do that. So here's another, Shane has another Jane O'Hara painting. Oh man, she's so good. This is called Who Me? Chain. You are owned and you are chained. The chain stretches from a spike in the yard to your neck. The yard stretches from a bare spot behind the house to a barren spot behind the house. The chain wraps itself around a paw, deft around an ear, a tail, 2 toes, a leg. The chain spins your body into a cocoon that spins into a ball, monstrous metal yarn, long enough to knit the earth a cold straitjacket. And in the heart of the ball is you. So that is the way that many dogs live their lives. But then there's Eleanor, and we lost Eleanor, but those of you who have seen the headshot that's often used in my PR or whatever is a picture of me holding Eleanor. Here's somebody. Oh, I think they're going out. And, you know, we lost Eleanor a few years ago. And here's one that I wrote for her. Eleanor, I loved all of you, even the cancer in your neck and blood, even the sick mirror, your black fleece, white cells, your bright red ones, the lymph and sera and your soft black mouth, all the elbowing cells keeping us up for each other a little longer. I humble before the system that built our illnesses, built your dog bones one by one and tied them together until you could walk towards me. The system that filled them with pox round as zero, pox tough as hide. Let us walk towards each other until our faces touch.
Mm. Do you guys feel the ache? The ache. So beautiful. It's so well done. It really is. Shall I ask of you guys, does anybody here have questions, or should I just keep bugging Gretchen? Because I've got like a, you know, I could just keep going, but what would you guys like to know? You can put it in the chat, or I'm not sure if you just want to unmute and talk to her.
Okay, it looks like Jackie wants people to type
questions into the chat.
So that works. Should we chat, you know, while that's happening?
Yeah, I can just keep bugging you. So,
okay. Bugging me, girl.
So I love possums like none other. And a lot of this has to do with, I volunteer at a wildlife rehabilitation center here in Asheville. And, you know, it's one of those animals that I didn't dismiss, but I just, you know, I wasn't particularly fond of them until I got to know them, until I started to pay attention. And, you know, we just go into the rehab and all their pink hands, and, you know, and they have such distinct personalities too. And I know you have a fantastic poem with, of all things, it springboards from a line by Jerry Stern, if I'm not mistaken, or at least the title does. And I was wondering if you could talk about that poem, maybe read it. It's pretty fantastic.
Oh, I love that you like that one. I like that one too. You know, I was, if there's other poets out there listening, I recommend, there's this, I thought I want to do some writing, and I don't have anything just springboarding itself. So I went to some books and I would just write out a compelling first line and then write off it, you know? And there was this Gerald Stern poem, and the first line was, "When I got there, the dead opossum looked like." And that was the first line. So I just wrote it at the top of a page and started writing, and ended up with this poem. When I got there, the dead opossum looked like a sleeping prince. He didn't want a majestic burial, as majestic burials are inane. He wanted his family back. He wanted to live, but we wouldn't let him. There were sweets to buy, and his route crossed ours, so we crossed him out. Nothing we could do then. And still, some middle-aged lady gathered him in her arms and keened, his cold nose in her ear. Keening is inane. His family wanted him. But there were ribs to buy and manifest destiny. I pressed his cheek to my cheek, stupid. I pressed his head to my heart, dumb. I've never actually gathered a dead animal into my arms, well, except for a dog that I've just, but I don't know. I could feel, I don't know about where you are in North Carolina and with the rehab, but around here you see them mostly when they're on the side of the road,
And that's what most people's introductions to possums. They don't understand what they're really like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we do have a couple questions, actually. So
Oh, great.
yeah, so let me go with the first one. It's from Wendy. And Wendy says, "I'm so honored to listen to this discussion between Nickole and Gretchen. So much beauty. I would really love to hear Gretchen read the pangolin poem, if she would be willing."
Ooh. All right, but it means we're getting a little heavy, but okay, we're already heavy, right? I mean, I'm sorry. There are lighter poems in the book, but I would love to. Is that Wendy Call or Wendy Larson? Well, you don't have to tell me. I'll bet it's Wendy Call.
It is.
Okay. Hi, Wendy. All right, so this one is called COVID-2. Pandemics almost all the time are zoonotic, right? They come from a jump between animals and humans, and they come specifically around the exploitation of animals. They don't come because you're walking through a forest and there's a squirrel on a tree near you. They come because of tight confinement, and we've had pandemics because of chickens in the US, and in this case we're tying them to these wet markets in China and such. But we need to be talking about that, because as long as we have this relationship with animals, we will have pandemics. We'll have them one after another. So I was frustrated that wasn't enough of the conversation, that it was like, oh, let's shut down this little wet market. Are we going to close the wet markets all over New York City? Are we going to close them, right? Are we going to close factory farms? We have to take drastic action, and it can't just be that we quickly make a vaccine and hope that, less than 1 million people die. Right. Yeah. So Wendy knows, because we were in a writing group together, that I was thinking about this very strongly and ended up with this poem. There's a theory that a pangolin in a wet market was a trigger for this particular COVID-19, right? COVID-2. Who was the pangolin caged in the truck, in the stack, in the market? What could her body, bald protection, no protection, smooth nail scales, no protection, do but uncurl and mark us? When did her cage unstack from the hens above, the pig below, the dog alongside? When did hands pull her smooth, bald body and slit her throat? for its tonic blood, cut her tissue for the pleasure of meat. Where moved the first virion in her body, eye, neck, heart? Did its twisted ladders course 1,000 times, 1,000,000 through the mouths of her cells before the hand came down on her neck? And the pig below and the hens above, what poisoned cells course through their dread? How do we fill our bodies without her body? The hens above and the pig below and the dog alongside leave their lives and deaths alone. Leave their cells alone. Why can't we? To tear someone from her life, to cage her, to let her blood, for our habit, did we imagine no consequence? Do we see it now?
That is full of so many good questions, one right after the next. Just unflinching questions. Jacqueline, are there other questions? Because I can't see them.
Yes, there are. There are.
Okay.
So next question, Gretchen, what is your favorite non-domestic animal? And have you written any poems about animals faced with extinction?
No, I haven't. Yeah, I really haven't. And my favorite, that's a tough one.
Well, the pangolin is facing extinction.
Okay, thank you. Whew, saved by Nick.
But what's your favorite non-domestic animal?
Yeah, I don't even have a favorite. Okay, I guess. Yeah, I don't really have a favorite. You know how kids have a favorite animal? It's like, what's your favorite animal? Mine was the pig. But now I wouldn't say I love them more than other animal. I mean, I really want to, I really, really want to kiss a chimpanzee on the face. I mean, I want to kiss a lot of animals on the face, but that, like a baby chimp, that would make me really, really happy. But I don't even know if I would say their favorite. It's too hard to choose. It's like a favorite food or something. Like I want all the different flavors, and with animals, I want all the different, dynamics. So cop out. Ooh,
that is a cop out. Next time, maybe.
Okay.
Okay, next question. And this is from Ingrid.
And who was that last one?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I forgot to say. I'm so sorry about that. And that was from Tanny.
Okay.
Yeah, Tanny. And this question is from Ingrid. I was wondering if Gretchen found any resistance to publication for this collection and what the publishing process was like.
Well, I took that kind of I knew that there would be, resistance. And I didn't, pursue traditional avenues for this collection. I went straight to Dale and Allison, and anybody who's in the Woodstock area, Dale Wise and Allison Koffler run Post-Traumatic Press. I was like, I know who I want to birth this into the world with, and it's Dale and Allison. They're stellar human beings, so stellar, and that's important to me. And they understand this. They would welcome this into the world. And it's interesting because I don't know if Nick wants to talk about it, but she had an occasion, where she did try a more traditional house for an animal themed collection that was too challenging, and she had a different experience. But I could go to them and say, what do you guys think? Like, would you want this for post-traumatic? And they welcomed it with open arms. So I kind of took that out, right, of of, I took that out of the equation. And then Lantern, somebody from Lantern Books approached me just in the Garden Cafe, who I know him, and he was like, if you would ever want to reissue, and then we talked about it. So again, I didn't, look to a traditional press for that either. And I don't know I think I know what would have happened if I had tried to. I think that there are certain topics that are challenging in ways that are okay in literature. And there are topics that are challenging that are not okay in literature. And I want this one to get into the second category. I want this topic, right, where we're staring these very uncomfortable, very ugly things in the face. I want that to come to the point where people can say, yeah, this should be talked about, but it's not there yet. And I understand how uncomfortable this is. I know that this is uncomfortable for some of you to hear, right? These poems, they're uncomfortable for me to say, but it's much more uncomfortable to be an animal in our society. And I'm willing to be a little uncomfortable and to make other people a little uncomfortable if they're in the situations that they're in. So, but thank you for the question, Ingrid.
Yeah.
That was it for the questions, and we have just a few minutes left.
Ooh, where do you want to go in our last few minutes?
Ooh, well, I want to say Angela Davis, who is a tremendous vegan activist and also a justice activist. What's that?
And a badass all around. She's amazing.
Such a badass. Total hero. She said something, it's like trying to live for a world that stops doing this and starts just doing this and starts, all the stuff that you've talked about, the essay from the greening of literature that you read in your class, and, this trying to envision this totally different world. She has this great quote, and it is, "You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world." You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. And I think, yeah, Angela, Yeah. So, you dream really big, and you act like that's possible to get. But yeah, if there's time for another question, if anybody wants to type one in. But what about you, Nickole?
I love what you say there. It echoes too of what I have read of Rebecca Solnit, and she talks about hope not as a feeling, I feel hopeful today or I don't, but as a verb, meaning hope is something that you do regardless of how you feel. And I think that Angela's edging towards that same thing. And I mean, Gretchen, you've been an activist all your life. I mean, you've done labor stuff, you have stood up for, women, anti-sexual harassment stuff, standing up for animals. And also, of course, you've been teaching at a maximum security prison for years now, and I think I commend you in that I love it when people truly write who they are. It's not that you're just putting these poems into the world because it sounds like the right thing to say. You're putting your body where it needs to be and then finding the words for it. And I think that it shows through in your writing, that authenticity and that force. And it's a gravity that I recognize so quickly, and a truth that I recognize so quickly. And maybe if there is another question, it looks like.
Yep. Another question came in, actually two. Okay. So the first one is, how did you select the artists or the artwork or the artwork for Kind, Gretchen? And that comes from Sarah M.
Hi, Sarah. Very organically. So I knew that I wanted that amazing image from Dana Ellen. You know, I know Dana and Jane because I've admired their work for so long. And Jane and I have done a couple of things together where there were kind of multi-genre events around animal issues. And Dana, I've been in her studio. I have several of her pieces. I just think they're both total geniuses. I knew I wanted her. And Lantern was like, well, what about images in the inside? So I thought immediately of more from Dana and ones from Jane. And then total effing nepotism when it comes to Gus, because he's my beloved. And I know his power with paint. And it was interesting because with Jane and Dana, I asked them if I could, you know, use their art and be in conversation with their pieces. They were totally down. And I chose existing pieces. But with Gus, I could say, you know what, honey, I need a mouse. Will you make me a mouse? I need a fish. Will you make me a fish? I want some elephants. Will you make me some elephants? You know, that was
That's
fun.
a good partnership right there.
And yeah.
So another question, Gretchen, what will it take for the disconnect to become clear in the beauty industry?
You know, it's actually, I have a dear friend, Jasmine, who is tangentially kind of in that sphere. And it actually seems a little bit easier there. Like very mainstream people are willing to say, oh my God, I will totally get cruelty free. Like, yeah, no brainer, in a way that I think it's not as tied to our habits as food is, as to our culture as food is, to that intimacy that food is. So it's easier for somebody to say like, sure, I'll grab this lipstick instead of this lipstick if it means no cruelty. Where for some reason it's harder for people to say, oh, I'll grab the non-dairy Ben and Jerry's instead of the not, like, you know, or I'll grab the oat milk instead of the. So you know, that seems to be happening like pretty well, you know, and we're seeing strides in terms of animal testing all over the world, including China. So I think the world is getting it.
Yeah.
It's fabulous.
Would you like to end with just one last poem?
Well, we only have 2 minutes, and I want to make sure to say a couple things. One, if you have not looked up Nickole, you have to read her books. They're tremendous. When she's talking about the authenticity in my work, is interesting because her books come from a much more personal place, familial dynamics, for good, for excellent, and for ill and such. But it's that same exact authenticity and that feeling that they need to be heard. You know, they're pushed out of her. She needed to write them. And those are my favorite kind, where it's like, this is not an academic exercise. This is something that needs to be out in the world. They're absolutely gorgeous. Of course, at the Golden Notebook, we have her books. Please get them from us or from her, you know, from your local indie bookstore if you're not local. So Nickole Brown, please get her books. And when you get Nickole's books, when you get my books, when you get books from indie bookstores, you're supporting independent bookstores, you're supporting artists like Nick and I, you're supporting small presses whose raison d'etre is to publish poems in the 21st century in America, which like is a thankless job. You're supporting them. So, you know, it's really such a powerful thing to do. And I really hope that you'll consider getting, you know, our books, other books, just doing that good work of making sure that communities have vital artistic spaces. And that means supporting the publishers who make that possible, the artists who make that possible, and the bookstores that make that possible. So that was my final poem.
You know, that is just like you though, right? Because you could like, here's more of me in my amazing work, but you are so gracious and generous. And I feel absolutely honored to share this space with you. I really do. And I thank you for paving the way with kind. I could not have found the poems that I did that I wrote about animals without you.
Mm.
And it's been wonderful to be taken on this journey with you. And I thank you for your steadfast work and deep intelligence.
Thank you, Nickole.
Thank you both so much. This was such an incredible discussion. I want to say to everyone, for folks that live in the Woodstock area, you can come to the Golden Notebook and have a conversation with Gretchen and tell her how much you love her work and talk more about these things. And we're so lucky at the Golden Notebook to have someone like Gretchen who works with us, who's our colleague, who teaches us and kind of helps us, learn and be on a continuum to kindness. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night. Thank you to our partners at the Woodstock Byrdcliffe Guild, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you, Nickole. Thank you, Gretchen.
Thank you.
Thank you.